This is my first YouTube flight. I am new to this, not new to flying, but new to recording YouTube videos, so go easy on me please. But we're going to be doing a very short flight going from KTWF, which is Magic Valley Regional, very near Salt Lake City, to Salt Lake City. And we're going to be looking at short finals Salt Lake City, so it's a paid upgrade. There's quite a few features we're using today. We're using SimBrief for planning. I've already done the plan and have the flight plan visible. Also, we are using the 767, the paid 767 in X-Plane, which is my favourite aircraft at the moment. Really beautiful aircraft. So it normally would be used for a longer flight than this. This is less than an hour, so it's not very good use of the aircraft. But saying that, it is a really nice aircraft to fly, a nice sort of a hybrid, I suppose, between old classic airliner flying and glass. So what else have we got in store? Well, also we have ForeFlight, which is a planning app which runs on a tablet or a phone. This is actually a commercial product aimed at, I think, mainly GA pilots, but I've been using it quite a bit with X-Plane, and it works very easily as long as X-Plane and ForeFlight are on the same network. It will actually work flawlessly. And I've been looking at some of the features on that. So what I'd like to do is to use that on the flight and show you how I use that. I think certainly for me it's worth paying for certainly the basic subscription. I'll explain what that includes. The company, the ForeFlight company, has given me the opportunity to try out some more of the advanced features, which are paid upgrades or a higher level subscription, and so I'm using that for the next week or so. So I wanted to actually showcase that in this video. So we are at KTWF at the moment. You'll see on the ForeFlight screen we're actually parked at the ramp, and one of the things that ForeFlight gives you is the ability to zoom right in to the airport level, which is fantastic. So I use this view whilst taxiing around on the ground after a flight or before takeoff. It also shows you, and you can actually see on this screen, there's a registration for another aircraft. That's the one shown in gold just to the left of the blue flashing icon. And if I change views, you'll actually see I'm currently blocking KLM that's been sitting there for probably near an hour. It's because this airport is really aimed at very small regional aircraft, not big heavy 767s. And if I just raise the position, you actually see there's a couple of aircraft blocked at the moment. Not a lot I can do about that at this point. There's another slight treat in store, if that's the right word. I've created a form which is really used for transferring all the information you get off SimBrief for use for setting up the aircraft. And I've based it on the 767, but actually this information will probably be usable in most airliners, not least the iPad panel, which I'll just bring up now, which is part of the 767, is part of the range of aircraft that's sold. Let's just bring that into view. I haven't set this up yet. I've just set up some ground features on it, the air and power, passenger bus and stairs, because there's no jetway here. I've got the fuel truck, chocks are set. I would use a de-ice actually because it's snowing here. This is real world at Magic Valley Regional. Also the baggage loaders are there. I should probably open some doors for that to be undertaken. Actually, not the front right door. And open all those doors so that we can start loading everyone on. The loading door is on. The stairs are there, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'd like to start before we do anything else, just go through the process of looking through the SimBrief flight plan, which I have here. And if you're not using that, simbrief.com, probably one of the more popular plans available. And this works really well with the 767. I found the fuel estimates to be slightly higher than actual usage, which is great, but only marginally quite accurate. The challenge really is that the plan, when you set SimBrief up, the plan in SimBrief may differ to your actual plan, so you just got to be cognizant of that. But there's so many contingencies that I've never got remotely close to running out of fuel. So I'm going to do that now. Just set this up. So first thing first, obviously your departure point, which is KTWF, and destination KSLC. And we'll put the elevation into that in a moment. I'll show you how we can get that from ForeFlight. What else do we have? Well, it's not in any particular order, but the cost index 3.8. And actually, one of the benefits of the form is when it's complete or near complete, then you know you're ready to start entering the details onto the aircraft. The routes, I have a route here. Now, one of the things about this particular route is that one of the stars for Salt Lake City is actually reaches out as far as this airport. It's well over 100 miles away. It's 166 air distance, so it's a huge distance away, but one of the stars actually extends out almost to the point of this airport, and so it makes a lot of sense to use that star. Let's just have a look through. So we have some fuel information on this screen. So block fuel 13061. Just write that in. Extra fuel 5 tons, and this form also captures the information in the format you need. So for the block fuel 13,061, but block fuel is expressed in tons, so 5.0, and that is exactly the figure that you'll be entering into either the 767 main menu screen or equivalent, or into the CDU. So it captures it in the format that you need. Let's just scroll down, and nothing particularly important there for us at this point, but we've got all the weights now. So passengers 212, and what it will do is approximate a weight for the passenger based on 1950s levels, which is obviously a bit far off reality. Cargo 10.5 tons, I'm going to write that's 10,500 because that's the format it requires. Zero fuel weight 121.3. And then our takeoff weight 1339. Now that's automatically calculated by the CTU, but it's good to put it in anyway. Centre of gravity we'll get from the tablet when we've entered the data in there. What else are we missing here? Just the alternative, which is KEVW. That's typed in there. The other thing is the cruise altitude, which I've gone for 240. That goes onto the plan. And one thing I found about SimBrief, I don't know if you guys found the same thing, but sometimes SimBrief comes up with the most obscure flight level. Like, you're doing a trip of an hour and a half and it comes up with flight level 160 or 16,000. In fact, it's not even high enough for flight levels. Which I don't really understand, so I normally put that in manually. The significance of that, of course, the planning is based on that height. So if you're thinking, okay, we'll leave it 160, but we'll actually fly at 380, you're going to be needing fuel to get up there. Although, obviously, the point of being up at levels like 380 is you'll probably end up using a lot less, even if you reach the cruise altitude and you reach your top of descent and start descending. As the theory is the jet engines work a lot better at that altitude. So other information on here with the planned fuel. Our actual trip only is just a bit under 3 tons, 15-minute contingency, a bit of fuel to get to KEVW, just under 2 tons there. Final reserve, just under 2 tons, giving a minimum takeoff fuel. We've got 5 tons of extra. We've got a bit for taxi. So we've got a huge number of contingencies here, and this is all based on worst case scenarios. Okay, let's go through the process now of completing the information into the tablet. I really like this metaphor, actually. It's so much better than having a menu. Now, one thing about this is in the event that the fuel that we require is less than fuel on board, we actually want some of the fuel to be offloaded. And actually, this is a pretty short flight. We only need 13,061 kilograms, and it looks like we have 13,608 kilograms, so we need about half a ton removed. It won't be crucial, but it could be that you land with 24 tons on board and could push you overweight. And of course all the performance factors are based on this data, so it's important to get it right. So cargo 10,500, fuel weight, I'm going to say what we want, which is 13,061. Okay, and that gives us a gross weight of 135,562, which, looking at our takeoff weight, 133.9, kind of tallies up. What I would normally do here is click on optimize center of gravity, and center of gravity is normally near around 20%, so hit in this case 19%, and we get the trim value from the CDU, so that is giving us our detail there. So we need to set this up first, and then the next thing we need to do is to load the passengers, and we also need to load the fuel. And normally, under normal circumstances, you'll be loading fuel in addition to what you already have on board. In this case, we're actually offloading. So I'm going to just try clicking the retouch load, which is loading the plane. And I'm going to switch up to the overhead panel now. And you can actually see the fuel values going down. So it should go down to 13, probably 0.1. While the passengers are being loaded. So retouch load is the button to click. The other thing I should say is I'm not starting here with a cold and dark cockpit, as you can see. What I do is I start with engines running. I normally connect up to ground power and air, and then switch off anything unnecessary, the ground hydraulics in particular, because they are dangerous if connected on the ground, dangerous being to ground crew. What you don't want to do is accidentally invoke the control column and end up taking someone's head off or giving them a headache. Neither is good. So we switch all the hydraulics off, fuel dampers off, leaving all of the fuel on at this point, and also all our electrics on board. Looks like our utility buses are off for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, switch them on and off. That's actually resolved those. What else? In terms of lights, just the wing lights at the moment, position lights, and logo, because it's not night but it's darker, so I'm going to switch the logo on. I'd normally put that on at night. Fuel set 13.1 as mentioned. All the fuel pumps are on. We're not using any. We don't have any fuel in the centre, so nothing's set there. Cargo heat, it's very important that those go on. I have forgotten those quite frequently, unfortunately. Probably wouldn't do too good a job with things like tropical fish or any livestock that are being transported. Those will go on after startup. Window heat stays on all the time, particularly at daylight today, where it is actually snowing out. Passenger signs, no smoking, seatbelt signs on. We set the landing altitude and the pressurization mode in a moment. We need to dig out that information for Salt Lake City. And then all our lighting. I mean, one thing about the 767 overhead, in fact 767 in general, is that you do find controls all over the place. So we've got some lighting controls here. We also have some controls to the left and right of the pilots. It seems to be wherever there's a space, sort of characteristic of traditional aircraft design. Flight door, well, we'll probably have that unlocked for now, but no one else is coming in, so we'll keep that locked as per regulation. And then the temperature control, so 21 degrees, everything's working at the moment. We're feeding from external air through to the air conditioning system at the moment. What we will do shortly is start the APU, and we'll feed air through that. So we've got air feed for the passengers until the engines start, and that'll get switched on just after engine start. So as you see, it's there is a bit of precipitation. So if you switch the wipers on, and we can keep those off for the moment. So this is my main view. I prefer this for takeoffs and landings. It gives a good view of all the instrumentation, and most of the controls are within reach. If you look over to the right in the second instrument display, you'll see that all the hydraulics are off at the moment, and if I move the control column, you won't see any movement effect on there at all. So this is a good one for starting the APU, and then I normally switch to the alternative screen, which is this one for engine start. I find this very confusing, the way this works. If you hit that again, you get main screen there. I'm not really sure what the thinking was with the design there, but hey, you know, I'm just the pilot. What else? Well, we'll be setting up the main control panel as and when, and also the CDU as well. I normally have that as a pop-up on the screen. Okay, so well, we have details of the route, and the next thing is we need to do some planning. So we're going to turn to ForeFlight for that. So this is one of the views of ForeFlight. This is actually the map view, and if I zoom out, you can actually see we have a kind of IFR route map, and we can augment that with different views. So I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I really enjoy using ForeFlight for flight simulation. I think it's an absolute no-brainer if you fly real planes and you fly simulators. So I think almost every real world pilot has a simulator at home. It connects so easily, it's reliable, it really enhances the experience of the desktop pilot, but I can imagine how much this really augments the experience of a GA pilot as well. Not least, one of the features that I wanted to show you, and this is not part of the basic subscription, but it's an add-on. I think it's $25 additional on top of the $99, is the kind of augmented reality, or they call it synthetic vision. There's not a lot to see at this point, but it's a kind of head-up display view, and what you'll actually see, and you can see that red triangle, is actually an obstruction, and as you're flying, particularly when you're landing in an area that's mountainous, you'll see mountains show, and it really gives you assurance, even in the simulator world, where worst case scenario you just get to have a bit of a bad day because you crash or get rather close. This gives you that assurance, particularly when you're flying IFR flight plans that don't really give you any assurance of your distance. You know, obviously if you fly them accurately, you know they're safe, but it's such an enhancement to that experience. So what we'll do is we'll switch that on as we come into Salt Lake City. At the moment we are at KTWF, and we want to plan a route. So this is the map screen. So this is obviously where you see the routes plotted, and you see all your position, and also any other visuals that you want to choose to put on there, including things like weather radar. I'm just going to click on KTWF, and I'm going to start by clicking Add to Route. And what that does, it puts it into my flight plan. Okay. The other thing I can do here, as an alternative to that, is I can type in a destination. So I'll do that for KSLC. And search for that, and I can add that to the route as well. But I can also click on any point on the map and add that to the route. I don't want to do that on this occasion, but that's what I can do. And then I can use the flight plan to control the map as well. So I'll say show that on the map. It's our starting point. Okay, so that's a basic route. So it's if we click on the route view, it's a little confusing on the screen because it uses that magenta format for so much, but hopefully you can see that thick bold line between KTWF and KSLC. Clearly we're in most cases not going to be able to fly such a straight line. Our route will be is going to be out to BYI VOR, and then a jetway from there down to KSLC. So the first thing we need to do is to actually look at the route options. Now, we could have done this in SimBrief, and if you have done that in SimBrief, you can type them in here and it will show those on the screen. If not, you need to enter the route in here, and then you need to program the aircraft to fly that route. One thing this does not do, and it shouldn't really be a surprise, but it doesn't integrate the plan that you put into here into the aircraft, and it wouldn't on a GA aircraft either. So there's a certain amount of navigation management that you need to do. Now, there's a number of ways we can do this. We could zoom in and say, okay, we're going to fly to BYI VOR first of all, so click on that, and then direct to, and add that to the route that way. But we could also type, we can say, for example, insert before KSLC, you could put BYI in there, return, and that then shows us that route, the current route in magenta, and then cyan for the remaining part of the route. I'm going to just remove that temporarily because there's an alternative way of doing that here. We can click on the routes button. It says route 6. Now what this is doing is telling you existing routes that have been filed, real routes that have been filed between those airports. And by clicking on it, it shows us this really smart visual that gives us some alternatives. And the top one is probably the one we'll go for. What it is flight to that BYI VOR, and then the Skis 5 arrival at Salt Lake City. It then tells you the altitude range that's possible and the distance. So if you're really frugal on the distance, we could go for a different one, this one down here for example, but I think that's a good one. Let's go for that. The other thing about this is it really simplifies it, because Skis 5 will be the arrival into Salt Lake City, and that starts at the Bravo Yankee India VOR. So, sort of 10 minutes after departure, we're already on the arrival. And so all we need to do is just select that route. And it's asking which runway we'd like for the Skis 5 arrival into Salt Lake City. Now, I should have really checked the weather there, but however, irrespective of whether it's a southerly runway or a northerly runway, we're going to be flying 90% of the same route. So let's take a punt on 16 left, 16 left for the Skis 5. Okay, and it just says it may involve additional points not included on the map, and that's fine. So we'll dig up the arrival plate for that. And then if you zoom in, particularly around Salt Lake City, you can actually start to see those points. And in fact, what I can do is just switch everything off other than the basic information. You can see then the route, more or less a straight line from BYI to northern Salt Lake City, Ogden VOR, and then just direct down to Salt Lake City. And if we're landing on the northerly runways, then it'll be very similar to that, except for when we actually arrive, we'll overfly Salt Lake City and come back in. Okay, on that note, let us check the weather. So there's a number of tabs along the bottom, and the ones that we're going to be using today are airports, maps, which we're currently looking at, and charts. Okay, so charts is where our approach plates will live. I'll show you how you build up that collection. The way it works in here is that because you won't have internet, probably won't have internet during a flight, a real flight, you can add charts to a kind of offline storage area, and then you can bring them up as your flight progresses. And this no doubt uses the GPS in the iPad or iPhone in order to keep track of where you are, and possibly may even integrate with onboard avionics. Same with the airports. You won't have access to this information during flight, real flight, so you'd need to save your airport data onto the system here. And what you can do is you can you can type in an airport here, Seattle for example, and then you can favourite that. And what that does, it adds it to your shortlist, and that button is to the left there, and it shows all the airports that we've shortlisted. And when you're done with one, you can say, okay, we don't need Seattle anymore, delete it. And all it's doing is deleting out of this area. It's not actually deleting from your system. So what I have here is Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, and KTWF Magic Field. The reason Albuquerque's there is because part 2 of this flight, which I'll record separately, will be from Salt Lake City to Albuquerque. And yes, that will be short finals Albuquerque, which is an absolutely stunning airport. So let's have a look at Joslyn Fields. Just select that. First thing we do is have a look at the weather and just make a quick note of the weather. And I make a note of that straight onto the airline planning form. So the wind is southwesterly 15, that's 240, 15. 2 statute miles, so it's lowish visibility, light snow, mist, scattered 500. And interesting, I love IFR flying. My only regret is flying around parts of the USA, the sort of places I like to fly are tend not to attract too much bad weather, but today's an exception, so I'm actually quite pleased. What else do we have there? Temporarily 1 mile in light snow, scattered 500. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, the other information that we need there is the altimeter setting. Sorry, that's the TAF. So it's actually 230 at 10. I've got the wrong tab there. That's why I couldn't see the altimeter setting on there. 1.25 mile at the moment, so it's quite poor visibility. Overcast 1500, temperature 1, dew point 1. Okay, that's important for setting our derated thrust takeoff. Altimeter 2961, very low pressure today. And that's what we need to know for the moment. And the other thing ForeFlight gives you, as you can see, is an English interpretation or a natural language interpretation of the weather there, which is really good. I'm a real world pilot, and I tend to just be able to read these now as a foreign language, but really handy for the GA pilot who isn't familiar with the METAR and TAF system. So what other information do we have here? Well, we've got the airport elevation, 4153, which we don't really need to know, but we could make a note of that. Also, we have, apart from the weather, we've got the runways as well. And this looks at the current wind and tells us which runway would be favourable. And here we've only got one choice because we can't possibly use the shortest runway with this beast. So we've got runway 08 or 26, and that's showing a crosswind of 6 knots, which is fine, and a headwind of 8, so for 26, and that's the runway we're going to use. So it's really handy actually, because you normally have the wind direction and vector, and you have to compute in your head or use one of those whiz wheel things to actually work out the wind vector. This is actually giving it to you. There's all kinds of other information about the runways in use there. And then you've got procedures, tells us departure procedures from this airport, for example. And we'll actually show you that as a chart. And you see at the bottom that's become a chart then. If I wanted to add that, if I wanted to use that on the flight, and I'm not going to today, but I could actually click the add button, and that will then add it to the list of charts. As I say, I'm going to fly radar vectors to get us to the Bravo Yankee India VOR today. Go back to the airport. We also have arrivals into Magic Valley Regional in case we needed to come back in. That's stars, and our actual approaches. We've got an ILS 26 which we'd use. However, if we had to come back in, I'd probably opt to go into Boys Internationals somewhere with more facilities. And it's such a short flight that just continuing en route, unless we had a grave emergency, continuing en route to Salt Lake City would probably be the right thing to do, depending on the circumstances. And then we have things like NOTAMs, and this is where it gets very into real world flying. It's just such a no-brainer for anyone with a private pilot license. And as I say, it's certainly an app that I'm going to be subscribing to as mainly a simulator pilot. And just some information from sort of standard documentation and all kinds of other information. This really would be for real world pilots, talking about the cycle. One thing to bear in mind about there is a potential conflict, and that's because ForeFlight will be pulling its data from the latest air cycles, whereas in the 767 I'm flying, I don't subscribe to anything, as many simulator pilots do not. So we're using a fairly out-of-date cycle, and although 99% of the data is the same, things like the arrivals, the stars, the instrument arrivals into airports can be slightly differently named, so you have to be a little careful with that. And sometimes there's small discrepancies with the route the aircraft will follow, which will be the older cycle data, and ForeFlight, which will be up to the minute. So that's quite important. Okay, now the next thing I need to get is the airfield elevation from Salt Lake City, and we can also have a look at the weather there. So the elevation just below the VFR sign, which is a good sign, 4227, and right that just below SLC. Okay, so one of the first things we'll do when the doors are closed will be to set that as the arrival elevation for the purpose of our pressurization. What else can we get from this? Well, you can click on it on the little diagram and get a kind of summarized diagram of the airport layout, which is quite handy. This is something that I think this is ForeFlight's proprietary information, not Jepson or whatever. Weather, of course, so we're on METARs, expecting a southerly wind, possibly quite a strong wind there, 8 mile visibility, overcast at 10,000. I'm just going to make a note of the altimeters, 2958. So definitely landing on one of the southerly runways, 16 right or left, 17. Probably going to go with 16 left for today. Weather-wise, absolutely fine. It's VFR. Breaking cloud at about 10,000, which is fantastic. Just having a look at the way the wind might change on the area forecast. That's 170. Not really going to change during the course of the flight. It goes to a sort of westerly as we get towards the evening, but absolutely fine for the current time. The other thing is I'm flying in Britain. I'm not using real time in the US, so this is meant to be is actually coming up as quite a late time when I started the simulator. I've started this from sometime in the morning, but obviously the clock on the plane will actually read 8 or 7 hours ahead, which is the UK time. I can't remember what it is from here, but it is a morning flight, so we're going to do that first. So let's have a look at the plan. Okay, so out to BYI, the skis 5 into 16 left in Salt Lake City. So that's a very basic plan. What we'll attempt to do is then put that into the CDU in the computer on board, and then any variations that we make to that we can actually update here. It's something we could do in flight. It just means that you'll end up flying the route that you see on the screen. Okay, go back to Joslin Field, and what I like to do is start zooming in, and actually something I need to switch on, because at the moment it's a very, very basic map information, is turn on basic aeronautical information. That gives us our airport plan plus minimum sort of IFR data. And I'll show you en route what else we can do, but this is a very short flight. It's not an ideal flight for demonstrating. But let's get on now and get on with the flight. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to close up the doors. Passengers are probably wondering what the delay is at this point. So just close all. It's probably the easiest thing to do. When we do that, just check if there's any failures, which there's none. One thing I do notice on the 767 is things like hydraulic level, fuel level, does get lower with time, and so you sometimes need to do a bit of servicing to maintain that, or you'll get a warning light. Okay, let's see what we've got on the ground. So currently using high pressure and ground pressure. We'll need to change that over to the APU. Passenger bus and stairs, well, we are now loaded, so we can get rid of those. Fuel truck, well, fuel's actually going away with more fuel in it, so we can get rid of that. Keep chocks on for the moment and get rid of the baggage loaders. Okay, and that's all we need to do for the moment. So now with the doors closed, let's go ahead and set the landing altitude. Put that onto auto 2, and it's 4227. I love the way this accelerates when you do it faster, but sometimes I get a bit excited with it and it goes a little bit over the top. Okay, so that's set, our fuel is set, and that's really important before we bring the CDU up, because it will have the weights of the fuel in there, and if you don't do it in a particular order, then it's quite difficult to do that retrospectively. Keep the APU off for now, and what we're going to do is just bring the CDU up. Okay, nav data out of date, which we understand, obviously that message won't appear if you have up-to-date data. So what we're going to do is position initialization and put in our reference airport, which is KTWF. And you see I've clicked on the top left screw. That gives me the ability to type the keyboard, which is really handy at the file when I'm setting this up. Okay, could put a gate in, but actually that's not that important in our example today. And then because that KTWF is already in the information entry area, we can just click on origin to transfer that. It's really handy. And then KSLC for our destination. And we're going to use runway 26. I'm not going to bother saving that or putting flight numbers or anything. Okay. And then we go through the initialization. So gross weight, we can let that auto calculate. Zero fuel weight 121.3. Put that in and you see gross weight now completes. So gross weight 134.4, takeoff weight 133.9. So it's always about half a tonne out. That's the amount. We allowed about half a tonne taxi fuel, so that works out absolutely perfectly. 5 is our reserve, so that's 5 tonnes. Cruise altitude 240. And the cost index is 3.8. So cost index is something to do with the fuel efficiency, the way the engines are managed and the fuel is managed. And that is something that is some data that really comes from SimBrief, and I don't know any way of calculating that manually. There's probably index sheets within the flight operations manual for this aircraft. So go to the takeoff page, flaps 5, always I think. And then we've got temperature, well, 1 and 1, temperature and dew point, so we just put 1 in for the temperature there. That'll give us our derated thrust. And what that is, if you're not familiar, is the standard way that you take off with a modern airliner, or the preferred way, is to use reduced power for takeoff. And the idea is if you've got a 12,000 foot runway, but you could get off in 6,000 feet, well, you probably only do that by really hammering the engines. So if you've got 12,000 feet available, it's fine if you're off at 8,500 feet. In fact, it means you can use the engines on lower power. Yes, it will prolong the takeoff roll, but that's not a problem. And so it's fairly standard practice to use derated thrust. But in order to know that, what that thrust level needs to be, you need to have the runway entered, of course, so it knows how much tarmac it's got And you need to know the outside air temperature because that affects performance. So next thing, centre of gravity 19, stick that in, and this is where we get our trim value, which is normally about around 4, so 3.8 sounds about right. Now trim will be set just after engine start, just before we start moving. What else do we have on here? Well, we've got the speeds, and if you have a look at the speed display on the instrumentation there, as I click on this button, it will calculate the V speeds, and I can confirm each by clicking on them, and you see it enunciates that on the attitude display. And I'm now going to transfer those values over to the form. So V1 133, rotate 140, and V2 149. And the other thing this will do is put V2 value in the speed box on the autopilot panel. Okay, so that's our setup. The next thing to do is to set up our route. So what we're going to do here is probably easiest because of utilising that star into SLC, which starts about 10 minutes after takeoff. Go to the departures page and we'll say we want 26 and execute that. And it does have a instrument departure. I'm not going to fly that today. For Salt Lake City arrival, we're going to go for 16 left, and we wanted to skis 5. Now this is a good example. So there isn't a skis 5 on here, but there is a skis 4, and so let's just make sure definitely isn't a skis 5. And that's because the data on here is slightly older. So it wants to know the transition point, which is the BYI VOR, and that's for the start of it and the end of it. When we transition over to the ILS, we can choose Weber or OGD, and I am going to use ForeFlight to actually see what we have on there and zoom out a bit. Get rid of that. So Weber's probably the choice there. Oh, okay, OGD. No, I tell a lie. OGD is the one. So this is just the point which we join the procedure. So we'll choose OGD there. Weber is just further up north from here. It's not shown because we're not including it on this particular plan. But that would be an alternative if we were coming more from the north than the northwest. So execute that. And then we can have a look at the legs. So there is a bit of a discontinuity, and that's absolutely fine. You do find that with these. I'll just flick through this quickly. So it's putting all the intermediate points. There's another discontinuity as we arrive from Iron, which is our point on ForeFlight. You can actually see Iron there. And then to OGD. And actually that would involve flying back. So what we'd probably want to do is to modify this path so we could actually avoid OGD altogether and just go straight to Hinky. So from boot, direct Hinky, and see if we can replicate that here. So we've got Hinky, then Iron, and then vectors OGD, Iron, and Tomb. So Tomb would be the next point. Execute that. I hope I explained that correctly. But so start from boots, Hinky, Iron, and then Tomb, which would be the next one. That's not actually being displayed here, I don't think. But that'll be part of the approach. That'll be part of the approach. And what we can also do here is on procedure, we can actually say, for example, for Salt Lake City, we want 16 left, and that's probably why that's not appeared on there. We're going to say via OGD, add to route. Bear in mind, this does not affect at all our actual flight. This is just visual, and there's a little bit of a screw up, largely down to me, that we said via OGD, but actually we want to fly via Hinkie, Iron, Tomb, Logden, etc., etc. So that's how we're going to fly it. Okay. Now the other thing is this. What you're seeing here is a feature of the premium ForeFlight package, which gives you charts appearing on the map view, which is really, really useful for an educational perspective. If you're planning to do instrument rating, and absolutely invaluable if you're a GA instrument rated pilot, I think. And you can switch that off, but I find it very educational to actually have this on view. So I'm going to keep this on screen. What surprises me a little bit with the way this works is that I thought the map part of it wasn't to scale on here, because obviously it doesn't need to be, but it somehow transposes onto the map. So I don't know how they've done that, but it's really useful, and actually you can follow that approach in, and you'll see that as we come in. It's the same with the chart as well. We can open this chart up in a separate view, which with the basic package would just show the chart literally as you have on paper. But with the premium package, actually show your aircraft superimposed on that. You literally see it flying the chart. Again, it's not something you would use as a primary method of spatial awareness, but just such great assurance that you're flying the route correctly, and that with the synthetic vision, absolutely incredible. Right, well, wasted quite a bit of time. Passengers are probably wondering what on earth is going on here. So what we're going to do is to continue setting this up. So the next stage will be to have a look at the routes and correct any discontinuities, which we have one there. So let's just put that into there. So taking off from the runway, we'll then head to the Bravo Yankee India VOR in an easterly direction. We're taking off towards the west. That will involve a left or a right turn, probably a left turn. What I like to do here is, when I'm flying these routes, is to not start with a particular procedure from point of takeoff, because at busy airports you're probably going to be vectored around quite a bit before you start that procedure. So knowing how to start that procedure manually from a radar vector, or even where perhaps the ATC has been favourable on you that day and given you a cost-cutting corner to cut and sent you direct to your third or fourth point, knowing how to do that, knowing how to take a ATC instruction and fly that is really handy. So let's just execute that route. The next thing to do would be to just zoom in on the display here. This is the navigation display, and we'll just set that up actually to show the full route, and just come out a little bit. And what we can do is go step by step through, and we're just checking there's no gross error here. So obviously you take off to the west, and then we head towards the BYI VOR, and it's computing the top of climb to be just after that. After Bleeder, Bear, Skis, Boot, Hinkie, and this is the approach, Iron, Tomb, Lagoon, Yip, Salt Lake City, and then the final bit is to the missed approach point and the hold, which hopefully we won't need to worry about too much. But that shows that we have a nice contiguous route there, which is great. So the next thing would be to just prepare this for the actual flight. So we normally do that in the map view. Just have a look at the scale. That's about right, actually. Sometimes we need to be a bit more zoomed in because we've got a lot more routes, but that looks about right. Okay, so we've got that set up. The next thing to do would be to work from the top to the bottom. Just make sure everything's ready to go up there. I'm going to be switching on the APU in a moment. That'll take a few seconds to ramp up. Our landing altitude is set, passenger sign set, All the air's working, passengers are nicely warmed or cooled, no other lights to go on at this point. Flight door locked, is already locked, no other lights. So come down and do the instrument panel. So we'll set this up so both flight directors on. Now, one thing, I don't switch the auto throttle arm switch at this point, and there's a very good reason for that, and I don't really understand why that's on the checklist, and that's because with that arms we could inadvertently invoke takeoff power at the gate or during taxi, and we don't want to do that. So with that switched off, there's absolutely no detriment as long as we arm that as we entering the runway, which is the point we'd want takeoff power. What we will do, we'll use our imagination a little bit for our initial altitude. So let's set that, say, 8,000 feet. Couldn't have done that twice. So that's our initial altitude. And we're going to use VNav, and that means that the aircraft will look at any of our altitudes. It will not. It will make sure we don't descend below this altitude when we're on the descent, but it will control our climb up to that height as well, which we want. I won't switch LNAV on. What I am going to do is switch heading mode on, and that will set our heading on as 348. Well, we know the runway's 26. Very rarely are they round numbers when we actually get there, so we may just trim that on takeoff, but 260. The speed has automatically got our V2 speed in there, and that's just part of setting up our CDU. And then when we take off, we'll actually take off with our toga power set, and then just at the point we hit the acceleration altitude 1,000 feet above ground level, you'll see the flight director control the pitch down slightly to his acceleration point, and that's normally the point I will invoke the autopilot. That will then allow the speed to build. We can lift the flaps up as we go. The other thing here, just switch that to auto and get rid of the warning light. And then we're just working our way down here. I'm going to set the pressure there, which I had 2961. Okay, and what we can do is just quickly check against our airport, Jocelyn Field, 4153. Bear in mind that altitude is not set necessarily where we are, but it would need to be within 100 feet, I would imagine. So 4153, we're not far off that, so that's acceptable. 2992 on our secondary altimeter. And the other trick with this aircraft, which I think probably everyone who has it knows, click the top right screw. Should be a book actually on the magic screws in this aircraft. What that does, it just transfers the altimeter setting to the other altimeter. As we're flying captain today, there's not really any need to worry about that, except for it'll come up with an annoying message to say the altimeters disagree. Well, very helpful message actually, but it's a bit annoying because the first officer would be setting that. But a quick workaround is just click that screw and it'll set it on the other side. The only other thing here is set the reject takeoff, which is our procedure in the event that we decide to abort takeoff. What else? Well, let's just click this to get rid of the CDU. The other thing is set up the decision height. And what we can do is we can have a look at the airports, KSLC, look at the procedures, approach, 16 left, and let's add that to the package. Okay. And just zoom in, we can actually see down here 200 feet is our ILS approach. If we're flying the ILS approach, 200 feet is the minimum. What we probably do is just add 50 feet for altitude or altimeter error to that. All right. Looking down here, shouldn't really be able to set the trim at this point because it's got all the hydraulics off, so that'll be set after engine start. Weather radar I'm not going to bother with. I'm not going to test any of this, and do excuse me if you're a purist, but just want to get on with the flight here. And also I'm not using a checklist, so I'm probably missing a number of crucial points, so do add your feedback. But the transponder mode is going to be on standby. One of our pre-takeoff checks will be to set that up. Okay, and let's lift the arm out of the way. There's nothing else to really set on here. We could set, probably do that now actually, because it is a short flight. The arrival frequency, ILS frequency 109.5 can be set on here now. 1.9, 109.5, and 164 is the approach course. We may as well do that now. I wouldn't normally do this until we're airborne, but it's a very, very short flight. It's why I've chosen this location. So after all my verbal diarrhea, we won't actually spend too long actually doing the flight. Okay, so we've got the altimeter set. We've got the rejected takeoff set. Trim will be set and flaps will be set after engine start, to say, for safety reasons. I know there's a number of things I've missed from the checklist there, but do excuse me. The other consideration today is temperature. It's 1 degree out. We should probably use engine and wing anti-ice, so we could actually switch those on. I'm actually going to keep them off for the moment and set those when we got the engine started as part of the taxi procedure. So without further ado, let's set the APU to start and switch on the generator, and just zoom in and you see the APU EGT starting there. Now it's not the same level of control that you get with the proper engine start, but you get assurance that it's spooling up. And what I'll do while that's happening is I'll also switch on the APU air bleed as well. You can see the pressure rose immediately there, so we're getting life out of it. And you should hear a click as the APU enters start, goes from start mode to on. You see no hydraulic pressure at the moment, all the hydraulics are off. So I didn't hear the click, but yeah, see it's APU's on. We've got power from there. So we could actually switch off the ground power and air. Now sometimes when you do that, you lose your power for some reason. I think there's a bug, because I've seen it on other videos, but not on this occasion. So what else? Well, we're going to be pushing back in a moment, so I'm going to put the taxi lights on, put the red strobe light on, white goes on just before takeoff, wing light will go on at night, takeoff if we want it. What else? Well, we set our pressure for the landing altitude, and the final thing we need to do is to turn off our air conditioning for startup. And the next thing will be to just have a quick wee look at where we are. So show KTWF on the map and zoom in. So 26 is out here, so we need to go tail to the right. I have set a view up for that. Now, the only problem is, in reality, you wouldn't be able to do anything with these aircraft parked here. What I'm going to do, out of courtesy, is to taxi into the hold point there to avoid hitting them, although thankfully it doesn't give me grief over that. What we do need to do is to ask for our lovely pushback. I'll just close that for the moment. I see the pushback truck arriving there, so I try to get a view similar to what they would have there. The other thing I intended to forget was the chocks are still in, so we're not going to go anywhere with those. Okay, so take the brakes off and then use the throttle to control. I love the fact that you can do this. The other thing I should have done, probably be whinging about now, is get rid of the ground power and air. And a slightly artificial view here, but you'll forgive me for that, I'm sure. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to position, get the brakes on before we actually start the engines. Normally you'd have time to do that during the pushback, but it's a very, very short pushback at this point. I'll just close the iPad for the moment. Yeah, you don't have very long after you initiate the startup before you start having to add fuel, and you really need to monitor the EGT for the fuel, make sure that you don't get a hot start. So while there's two of you, realistically that's quite doable whilst monitoring your pushback, but here you're a single pilot and also a pushback operator, so it's not really an ideal situation. I think we might get a complaint from KLM over this. It's not a perfect pushback, but that'll do. I'll just slow that up. And there he goes. Okay, brakes on. And we can send the pushback truck. Bye-bye, thanks so much. There he goes. Okay. So we've got air conditioning turned off. We've got good pressure here. Got fuel on, ready to go. So the next thing will be to initiate the start sequence. And also get the right screen for that. 8, 9. So we're looking for 15 for engine start. And there it is. And we see the EGT rise. Goes up to about the yellow mark. And then as the N1 starts spooling up, we should see a drop. A fairly sudden drop. There it goes. Okay. And we can switch on air from the engine, power from the engine, and put all the hydraulics on the right engine on now. And as we've got the APU running, we can do the same for our air from that side and the electric hydraulic pumps. Okay, everything's looking good, and we've come off of the start switch, so we can actually start the second engine now. We'll be communicating with ground about this, of course. There it goes. Engine 1 looking good. Engine 2 just spooling up now. Here it is. That was a bit late. Hopefully that'll be okay. Quickly check we're not moving. Seems much easier to do if you're in a real cockpit. And the EGT dropping as the M1 spools up there. So it looks like we have a good engine start. Starter switch off, or valve off. We can switch on our power, and you see the flickering. It gets so beautifully represented on here. And of course, import gets the temperature up again. It's dropped to 18 degrees so quickly. And hydraulics on again. And we can stick the yaw dampers on as well. Actually, we should find all of these orange lights go off. So we shouldn't have any orange on at this point. So cargo heat, really important, switch on. What I will do is I'll switch the anti-icing on now. There is an animation on here for de-icing, that's control surfaces. It is just an animation, there's nothing more to it than that. Okay, temperature's rising, which is good. Okay, so the only FMC message you should get is parking brake, and we know about that, so that's fine. What else do we set? Well, the trim and the flaps need setting. Trim is pretty well there, actually. 3.9 is the value, so it's about there. Okay, and then flaps, 1, 2 should set 5 degrees. And actually I have a wing view as well, you can actually see the flaps coming out. Slowly but surely. And just on, I find this very difficult to read unless you zoomed in, this flap display. From this position, really difficult to view it from there. But we've got our flaps set. Okay, so we are switched to the ForeFlight view. There's a button which will centre on our aircraft. At the moment it's not really giving us a lot of useful information. Let's just close the flight plan part down. And what we need to do next will be a hydraulic test. So you can see our hydraulic pressure is good. But what we're going to do is move our controls like this as we taxi out normally to make sure they're working correctly. Okay, so that's doing that now. So we're kind of pointing east, so we're actually on the taxiway out. Add a bit of power. The very, very first thing to do, of course, is do a brake test. So we get a bit of speed left. You see the way the ForeFlight screen is orientated itself there. It's like typical GPS, it doesn't know about your actual horizontal orientation. So there's the brake test my side. First officer would test theirs. Okay. Now normally you test the rudder by natural turns, but we only have a right turn at the end. So I'm just going to test the rudder now. Might seem a little bit odd to passengers. And then test our control column, full, free and correct. And centered. Nose down, return, nose up, return. It's really important at night actually to look out the side views to see the taxiway lights, although you can't really see them. This is a small airfield, but your sense of speed is really impaired at night looking forward, and so you really end up looking sideways to navigate, which seems a little odd. The other thing we could do here is just get the windshield wiper on. I only need that while we're on the ground, really. Love the sound effects of that. So we're aiming for Alpha 1. Actually, I hate that sound. I want it off now. Also, just a quick eyeball on the windsock there. It's quite a strong wind, so I'm going to be off the ground fairly quickly, I think. So I'm using a Cytec throttle unit, which actually is fantastic. I have built home simulators before. I've used much more expensive equipment, and this is really, really good. I love the way you can configure it. It's a little bit plasticky. So I use throttles 1 and 2. It's a 3-lever thing, so throttle 1 and 2, the first 2 levers. Lever 3 is air brakes, speed brakes. For an airline is absolutely crucial. But you can actually set that up to operate according to the aircraft. So if you're flying, for example, the single engine jet on here, you can obviously you don't need throttle 2. So I use that for flaps. And there's no air brake either, so you've got a spare. Okay, so we're approaching our hold point now. So I'm going to switch our air conditioning off again. Flight mode to continuous. Switch that on. Quick check where we are. Yep, coming to a hold. Normally you try to do this whilst you're taxiing along, but there's only one of me, so I'm going to be doing this on my own. So stick the brakes on, and back to the top, just making sure we've got all the hydraulics on. Don't need the wing lights. I'm going to put the landing lights on at this point. You can turn the taxis off. So this would be when you're clear for takeoff. We've got our engine and wing icing on, which is important today. We've got our cargo heat, which is also important. Well, any day really. Window heats on, passenger signs on, pressurisation set, flight door locked, and good pressurisation for takeoff. So we are done. The only thing to set will be the transponder as we enter the runway. And the other thing would be to set that mode. So I'm just using the left engine now to control the speed a little bit, but also control the turn.
26.
So we get an annunciator that says left and right packs off.
Entered runway 26. 8,600
so while it's doing
feet
that,
remaining.
switch this all the way to TARA. And before we do the final bit, we will just check the heading and set the heading. And I actually find this view, sort of zoomed out view, better really for this. There we go. So just zoom in a little bit and you can see 260 is not quite runway heading, so let's just move that there. So 253 would be runway heading. That's the point auto throttle comes on and we are ready. So let's enter TOGA. Try to line up with the runway a bit, didn't do a very good job there. This is not a long runway, this one. So now I can find my heading's not quite right, but that's fine. So V1 approaching and rotate. Gear up. And just raise to about 18 degrees. And we're waiting for our 1,000 foot above ground level at this point. Should be holding the speed there. And there's the slight throttle reduction there as we reach 1,000. That's normally the point I switch on autopilots and just monitor the systems and make sure that that's holding all right. And you can see speed build up now. And first stage of flap can come up. Or should I say 5 degrees to 1. Normally the first officer or the person not flying would be checking this. And then 1 degree flaps up. And in VNav mode, all of the throttle and the vertical speed is controlled by here. So we're up to 8,000. So probably hand it over to the departure frequency now, and we'll just use a bit of imagination here. And so we're given a left turn to 160. Not a lot to see today out of the windows, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get the packs switched on again. Passengers will be starting to freeze. And we may as well switch the logo light off at that point. So this is typical of fairly foggy, low level. We can see we're breaking through already. Beautiful. And 8,000 we've reached at this point. And let's go ahead and give ourselves a bit more of a turn, so down to 130. And windscreen wipers can come off now. So this is typically what would happen on a flight, at a busy airport at least. And let's go up a little bit, 12,000. Now if you've leveled off, nothing will happen, so you need to switch back to VNav mode to start that going. If you're going up a significant amount, I would increase by a couple of thousand, switch to VNav and then set the final altitude. So it's managing the throttles, it's managing the speed. We're 240 knots below 10,000 feet, that's the way it's configured. Can override all of this, but that's the standard. And there we are, beautiful. So we're above the cloud now. So I think we can switch off our anti-icing. And while we're at it, we'll switch landing lights off as well. And we have the APU on still, which actually I meant to switch off on the ground. It's not a bad thing actually to take off with that on. Except for you don't want it on the whole flight because it does use some fuel. So you can see the magenta line on the navigation display. Let's just head around to that. typically would be ATC's responsibility. 170. No, it's not quite right. Say not 70 degrees, rather. Let's go for 40. Want a bit of an intercept. That'll do. That's fine. And you can see down here we're going to intercept just before BYI, or we could actually have selected direct to BYI. Okay, the only annunciator we have, APU generator off. That's because the APU is spooling down at this point and we switched it off, but that annunciator message should disappear fairly soon. Reached 12,000 feet, hoping for more. So let's say we're given flight level 200. Again, won't do anything till we hit VNav. And it will then manage that climb, including the high speed now above 10,000. Let's actually set the speed higher. So what I'm going to do, actually we're going to probably coincide with BYI, just to demonstrate something else we could do here. Let's say we're given a vector of 020, and that will intersect the route up to BYI before we actually reach it. So we're still on radar vectors and horizontally still on heading select. But what we can do when we're on an intercept is click LNAV, and nothing will happen other than LNAV appears in white, which means it's armed, and it will automatically take over when we get within, I think it's 2.5 miles of the track. Okay, quick check up here, see if I have forgotten anything. Ah, looks good. Surprising, actually. So, turn our attention back to ForeFlight. You can see we're out in the middle of nowhere. Not really, we're actually just very zoomed in. So this is really handy for our navigation, just for situational awareness. You see we're on an intersect to the track between TWF VOR and BYI VOR. And then the aircraft should pick up on that and it'll be commanded to fly that track from that point. Let's set our cruise altitude to 240. The other thing at this point, when we get above 18,000, and actually when we're cleared above 18,000, so we could have done this sooner, is to set our altimeter to 2992. But what I do first is set the standby one to the last known pressure and then set this one. And the reason for that is because if we needed to get back in and we weren't able to pick up on our altimeter setting, then we could, then it's kind of a notepad for that. So we're in LNAV mode here. You can see the aircraft banking to the right and intersecting that path. That's really, really nice. So the thing about this flight is it is a short one. What I would do here is just have a look and see what our optimal cruise altitude is, and it says 360. So we could request that. Let's do that now. So say cruise altitude 360. It says unable, and the reason is because if we were to go up there, our top of descent would coincide earlier. But what we can do is just clear that message and maybe go for 300 and see if we can do that. Okay, so it's accepted that. So we could request flight level 300. Once approved. Actually, we're already in the climb, so that'll just continue up to 300. I was wondering why it wasn't levelling off. I didn't realise it's still climbing. So that's 300 set now. The other thing to do, as we are some distance out is we can actually look at the arrival legs as well. It seems really early, but one thing that the CDU does, which is a bit annoying, is sometimes the arrival speeds are really high. So what I need to do is to reference the chart now for the ILS. Just got a traffic alert there. I can't see anything. Occasionally you get those alerts and they just disappear. Maybe a slight flaw in the system. We've got a little bit of a tailwind today. Well, actually not a little one, actually decent length. So you see the top of climb, top of descent actually not far off each other for flight level 300, and we've got a slight glimpse of the terrain below. What was he looking at? We're just going to check what speeds we need really for the approach. So probably by Lagoon we need to be at a slightly slower speed. It's certainly not 240. So I say Lagoon should be say 210. 210, and then we have to. There's no way you can just change the speed. You have to actually change everything on here, and it will scream at you if you don't get the same values there. So the speed is changeable. And yep, let's go for 166,000. And then that next one would be our missed approach point, so that's fine. Yeah, just looking at that. I think actually I'm going to change Tomb to 210 at 9,000 above. The reason for that is because it's only got 4 miles to knock off 30 knots and 1,500 feet. It's going to be quite impressive. Hopefully at that point we'll be on the ILS fully established. Okay, just approaching 300. In fact, that is a real optimal cruise altitude because we'll be there for a few minutes and then start our descent. And on that note, I want to show you another feature of the ForeFlight. So at the moment we're in a sort of track up view, which is my preferred view. You see the approach plate is upside down because of that. So as we approach, we might put a north up and it will show the plate properly orientated. I just want to show you some of the other views on here. One of my favourites is the sectional view. And normally I will zoom in a little bit for this. So this is showing the terrain below our flight path. Really important actually, because once we've reached our cruise altitude, just checking, there's a MCP message says check the target altitude, and that's actually reaffirming what I'm about to say. As we're approaching the top of descent, we need to decide what we're going to command this to descend to, and I'm looking at the first height, flight level 213. That's not a fixed altitude. In other words, it's not that if we go below that at that point, that should be okay. So it's set flight level 200. And what will happen when it gets to the top of descent, it will descend automatically. But it won't do anything unless we make that lower. It's one of the first things I learnt when I was learning this system. So it's always good. Now, the reason for showing you the sectional is because you see the large number with the small number beside it. So, for example, 10.3, that's 10,300. These are the sector safety altitudes. And at any point, it's worth setting your altitude to be no lower than that, because it means in the event that you have a decompressurization, you're going to need to come down to 12, 13,000 feet. And certainly around this area, around Salt Lake City, we've got quite a few obstacles. Nothing that's going to affect us today, but 12,000 would probably be the minimum set at this point. So that's on the VFR sectional. And actually what I'll show you is we switch to north up. And actually show, it'll track the aircraft still, but orientating the map properly so it makes more sense. So with that in mind, I could set 12,000 as the altitude, but I see where you see on the leg where it's written in bold, that is a at, or if it says A, it means above, or B means below. So here we've got to take notice of that. Okay, so we just hit the top of descent, so this is a quick flight. I'm going to set that to 13,000, so it's not going to descend to 13,000. It'll still be under command. It has said drag required. You must always get that as part of the top of descent point, and that's because the speed has come down to a descent speed, which is slightly slower than our cruise, and we're not shaking any speed without some air brakes. Just check those air brakes are out, as you can see, and then just feed back a little bit, and you normally need a tad of air brake just to maintain it. How about our arrival into Salt Lake City? Well, we've got our ILS. We need to know the frequencies for that when we check the ident, which is dot dot dash 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 dot dash dash. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably think I've gone crazy, but that is your standard ident, and that's really important because sometimes these instruments share the same ident. So let's just make sure we've got the frequency 109.5, and if I remember correctly, we actually typed that in, 109.5.164 track, and I'm just going to switch on the ident now. We won't hear that until we're a lot closer, but we've got to know what we're listening out for. If we hear an ident, it may be the wrong one, and that does happen frequently, so we've got to be very, very careful. What else do we consider? Well, we're on the descent now. You can see we're actually not far off that cloud layer, and so we may want to switch the anti-icing equipment on as we approach it. Nothing else to change on here for the moment. Normally on longer flights, I'd click on progress. It's quite a nice thing. It's particularly if you're giving a passenger announcement, give them the arrival point. Looks like about 8 o'clock Zulu. Well, 5 to 8 never works out quite as well as it appears here, because this doesn't consider you're slowing down and taxiing and etc. But for this flight, we'll click. It will stay on the legs page. So what the autopilot will do will be to adjust the power to maintain this perfect path. So a GA pilot might descend to 3,000 feet, for example, and be there a lot earlier. With a jet, you generally want to stay as high as possible, but you don't want to end up having to do mammoth descents. Well, we didn't get a chance to switch the passenger seatbelt sign off, and it is a short flight, but we'd probably be considering putting it on now as we're about to getting closer to the cloud level. The other thing that we need from Salt Lake City is the ATIS. 12475 is written on here. Oops. And I will tap that in here, except for it's already in. Funny that. Just switch over and we should pick that up. We can use ForeFlight. They should actually be... this gives us the weather for Salt Lake City, so click on that tab. 11 minutes ago, so it's fairly up to date, and it's giving 29.58 on there, but I will hold out for that pressure setting from Salt Lake City ATIS on X-Plane. But we can still use the secondary altimeter to just use that as a little notepad there. So that green mark on the navigation display is where we'll start levelling off. And in accordance with the altitude we set, 13,000. Okay, which should be boot, and that's absolutely perfect. So we have a little bit of drag, not really any. But as we get lower, of course, the restrictions certainly below 10,000. We need to start slowing up quite a bit. So one other thing to look at as we're approaching is synthetic vision. And you'll see this is a bit more interesting than now we're actually flying over mountainous areas. At the moment it's showing everything in green, and very basic grounds, a bit like an old version of Flight Simulator. But crucially it's showing you where you're, well, showing us at the moment we're clearing the mountain tops based on our altitude, but as we get down to 13,000 feet we're getting close to those. This also shows you your approach path. It shows you your approach path, and it shows you the runway as you are approaching the runway, which if you're in very low visibility I'm sure would be really welcome. But it looks like we're about to hit cloud. I think we're going to switch some anti-icing on here. So I'm pretty sure it's, I haven't looked at the icing levels, but I'm pretty sure we'd hit ice as we go through. The other thing is, as we're getting closer to the action, I'm going to just zoom in a little. Actually, just keep it on 20 for the moment. But as you get nearer, you'll see all the waypoints get much closer together. And at this point, definitely we have the seatbelt sign on, but we left it on anyway. So you might just do that to remind them. Cabin announcement. So how are we doing? We've got the height, we're just turning slightly to skis, and just under 17,000.
Wind 170 and 15 gust 29. Visibility 5. Sky conditions 1,600. 11,000 overcast. Temperature 11. Dew point -10. Altimeter 296. Arriving runways 16 left. 16 right. 17.
Departing runways 16 left.
Departing runways 16 left.
16
right. 17.
Advise on initial contact to
Advise
have
on
golf.
initial contact to have golf.
Okay, we can switch that off now. Okay, so wind shear is the key thing I'm getting from that. That is quite a serious condition to watch out for. So we want to maintain a certain speed, because the impact of that could result in us stalling early, stalling before we actually land, which is not a very good thing. Right, just listening to the Morse code, it's not sounding right. Oh, it is now. Okay, so we've identified the ILS. That wasn't sounding correct until I zoomed in and then picked up on the correct one. As I say, it can pick up on an alternative approach, amazingly. And you see the marks now. It says fly left, fly up. As we're coming down here, this line going sort of northeast is showing our track, and we're actually approaching from the right, so it should say fly left. That makes sense. Just into cloud now, going down to 13,000. So we need to now set our pressure 2960. So we're actually quite a bit lower. That's why it's important to do this. And then alts disagree, they don't any longer. So we're just approaching 13,000. That can go to 2992 on the secondary altimeter. And 1,000 to go, just below 13,000. Just check, 3 miles, 280. So we're going to hit 13,000 at boot. And what I'll do, as promised, I'm just going to zoom in on the navigation display a little bit. See there's points on there, better space then. So as we get to Hinky, that's going to be our interception for the localizer. As we've identified that already, assuming air traffic control gave us that permission to do so, we'll actually put the localizer function on here. And that will just maintain our heading until we pick up on the localizer. and then will fly us in. And the other thing we'll look out for when it happens is the glide slope. So now 11,000 is our minimum, so we can actually go down there and hit VNav. Okay. Because normally your glide slope indicator won't start moving really until you're established. Drag required, okie doke. And that message should go away automatically when we reach near the speed. There it is. Whoops, that was a bit of wind shear. I don't know if you witnessed that at all. Speed drops a bit. That's the wind effect of the wind shear, I think. And there's our localizer turn. So we could have left that on the LNAV and then set the localizer when we've completed the turn. So it's now going to ignore the ground plot positions, which should actually be on the ILS. And now our speed, as we're approaching below 10,000, should be 240. So we're going to continue with the air brakes. And we should be able to bring the first stage of flap as we start the descent. Okay, air brakes are retracted, and next stage will be in approach mode, so that will then pick up on the glide slope as we're on the localizer. And there it is. I'm just going to bring in some bit of air brake, and I'm going to put the gear down at this point. And then I can take the air brake off because the gear acts as a little bit of air brake. Should be enough to maintain our speed. So we are some distance away. We'll switch the landing lights on at this point. The other thing that we need to look at is the missed approach procedure. Ahead to 2,000, so it's ahead to 4,800 and then 10,000 to the FFU. Hopefully we won't need that. So now, because we're on the glide slope, it's not controlling our speed, so we need to do that manually. So what I'm going to do is set in, set 190. So it gives us back control of the speed. Bit of air brake coming out, as you can see from our wing view. And then we're looking for the first stage of flap. And you see that enunciated with an F on our speed strip. So we're just coming up to that now. First stage of flap coming out. You see the red markers indicate the limit of that flap level. And so that's the next stage of flap, will come about 200. And so we'll be ready for that. And on this occasion we actually already see the approach point. And you see we're appearing on the approach charts, really lovely. If I switch to the other view, you can see some of the terrain. So we'll maintain 190 really until yip, and then get to 160. The other thing we can do, excuse me, is have a look at our reference point. So 30-degree flap, 138 knots, and that's the target speed for landing. So 5 miles to yip, we want 160. We're continuing the descent on the glide slope. We'll set that up now. Bit of air brake, You do get a warning with air brake when you're starting to get near the ground, of course. Bring the other stage of flap in, that will help our speed reduce a little bit. There it is, air brake is retracted. And as we approach 160, the next stage of flap to come in. Okay, runway clearly in sight. Let's bring that stage of flap in. 138 was our reference. Undecided. I may do a full auto land here. I may just do it manually. I'm not really decided at this point. He says. What I mean is if I screw it up, I'll just go back and edit in an auto land. Right, I'm just going to get rid of the CDU because we are now shortish final. Next stage of flap, and we'll bring it down to 150, 138 being our reference speed. I'm going to keep the speed at 150 actually. It's wind shear alerts are in place. And there's our slightly reduced ground visibility. And you know what, I'm going to do a full auto land on this occasion. And bring in the other stage. I'll be the final stage of flap now. And I'm going to keep 10 knots above that VREF. You see the wind is slightly from the right. 1,000 feet to go. See we've got landing clearance. Final check, gear down, flap set. You see on the synthetic vision you can actually see the runway appear, and those yellow things are obstacles. I don't know, it's certainly for a Cirrus simmer it's a no-brainer. I think certainly if you're a GA pilot it's even more of a no-brainer.
500.
So it's all over the place. It's got quite a strong wind there. Normally this would be me flying, not the system, but who's to judge? So this is going to be an auto land, so we'll see how it gets on. Oh, goodness. It's uncomfortable. I'm actually fighting it at the moment. That wasn't good. That was definitely the system flying, so okay. Auto throttle can come off now. And the other thing we can do is just switch all of that gubbins off. And as we approach 60 knots, we come off this high speed exit here. And you see on ForeFlight it's switched over to Salt Lake City, the ground chart, which is really neat. Now again, you don't get this with the basic package. It's one of those features that you're paying extra for. So Hotel 7 we're coming off of. And just get clear of the runway, and then we can clean up. Find somewhere to park. Okay, so we are off the runway, so we'll call clear to ATC, and switch our, put the taxi lights on and switch the landing lights off, and we switch the white anti-collision light off, and we might have the logo light on, but it's actually fairly more or less daylight now, so that's not a problem. The other thing we'll probably do is just hit the APU and get the generator on, just in case we don't have any ground power. In terms of the rest of the cleanup, the flap, that can go all the way up now. And obviously our taxi instructions now. So we need to find somewhere to park. Normally we'd be given some ATC instruction, but we'll just take the first major space that we find that would be suitable. So it's got the APU generator on. Might just want to have that screen up that shows us that it's starting up. And AP Gen off should disappear. That's running. There we are. So this is the paid upgrade to Salt Lake City by Short Final. Absolutely love their work. Absolutely amazing. First time I installed it, I looked at it, I thought, oh, this is nowhere near as good as I thought. I hadn't realised that I hadn't actually installed it correctly. And then I did, and it's like, oh my, you're kidding me. Absolutely amazing stuff. So we're doing quite a lot of work ourselves as X-Plane pilots. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just pause the simulator a moment, get the brakes on, and then we can go to camera view. And we can have a quick peek at where we might go. Probably, let's have a look. C13 would do us actually. That's right ahead of us. So back into the cockpit. Just let our baggage guy go, and then we can go C13. It's a bit more difficult to see from here. Keep getting speed brake warning. It's one thing about the SciTech control unit, it is a little twitchy at times. Lots of ground traffic here, which makes it a fantastic experience. There's C13 there, and there's our guideline. Now the other thing that's notable is the sort of docking automation here. Actually, this is a bit of a tight turn. Not sure how well I'm going to pull this off, but you certainly need to overdo it. So we've got our APU running, so as soon as we're parked up we can hit the brakes and switch off our engines, and that should keep the power running until we get the ground power and air running. So if I just zoom in a bit, see the green light there, so that's our docking guidance system, and that should just go to orange, yeah, and then red. Just keep really slow. There it is. Sometimes I find the brakes just don't work when you want them to, but they are set now. We have our APU running, so we can close down and just make sure everything is still running. Power is okay, which is great. We can turn off power from the engines and air from the engines. And you hear the bell there, that's the jetway attaching. Right. Switch off our anti-collision lights. All our hydraulics should go off at this point as well. fuel, that can go off. Our cargo heat can go off. I normally keep the window heat on, so it's not being done in a very logical way at all. Taxi lights can go off, don't want to blind the ground people. And seatbelt signs off. So the next thing will be to interact, and we can say gate configuration, so that'll be the gateway. I'll put the chocks in, high pressure and power. We don't need passenger bus or stairs because we've got the gate jetway, and we need to open the door, and then we can say unload. And the final thing to do here is switch over to external power, and we can turn the APU generator off and switch that off, and just monitor that. That will eventually start slowing down while the passengers are getting off. What else? I think more or less right. So this will be kind of the state you'd leave the aircraft in, passing over to the next crew, because I'm going off to play golf at this point. So that just leaves me to thank you for watching, and I hope you loved what you saw with ForeFlight. I am not a subscriber yet. I am going to be subscribing. I'm just in two minds as to whether to go for the $100 package, which is a bit of a no-brainer if you're a serious simmer, or the $200 one. Just to sum up the difference there, on the $100 package, you won't get charts overlaying on the map, the main navigation map. You also won't get the synthetic vision, but the synthetic vision is available for $25 extra, so $125 to include that, and I'm very tempted to go that level. $200 will give you more than what I've just described, including showing a position on the chart here, which is really handy actually. It's without that, you end up having to switch to map view and zoom right in to see the ForeFlight sort of image of taxiways, but then it'll give you more or less this vision. So $75 extra. I don't know, I'm in two minds. I think it's a yearly subscription. I may well go for it. Certainly will go for the synthetic vision. And there's other features that I haven't even looked at, which would be available as part of that. So this is part one. Thanks for joining me. Part two will be flight from Salt Lake City to Albuquerque. You could call that a short final flight. Short final being the scenery producer. Both Salt Lake City and Albuquerque are being upgraded to the wonderful work of Short Final, and I'm saying that without any commission or anything. It's really good work. So join me for part two, and look forward to it, and thanks for your company today. Take care. Bye now.